Status report, she commanded, her voice cutting through the desert air like a blade. Chief Engineer Dr. Patricia Patterson looked up from a tablet displaying enough diagnostic data to fill a library. General, we've run every protocol in the manual twice. Electrical systems show nominal readings across all networks. Hydraulics are fully operational. Fuel systems are clean, but the main engine and all auxiliary systems refuse to engage. Elena's jaw clenched involuntarily. She had inherited her father's belief that every problem had a solution. You just needed the right combination of intelligence, resources, and determination. Colonel Miguel Rodriguez had been a tank commander in Vietnam, a man who could fix anything with duct tape, determination, and creative engineering. But he had also taught her that leadership meant taking responsibility when everything went wrong. "What about the backup systems?" she asked, though she already dreaded the answer. "All functioning normally in isolation, ma'am." That's what makes this so puzzling. Every individual component tests perfectly, but somehow the integrated system won't initialize. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. General Elena Rodriguez wasn't born into military royalty. She had clawed her way up from the enlisted ranks, starting as a 19-year-old private from East Los Angeles who joined the Army to escape poverty and pay for college. 23 years later, she commanded one of the most elite armored divisions in the world, overseeing an annual budget of $2.8 billion and the training of America's next generation of tank commanders. Her rise through the ranks had been meteoric but costly. While her peers were starting families and building relationships, Elena was studying tactics, mastering logistics, and proving that she belonged in rooms where women weren't welcome. She had sacrificed everything, marriage, motherhood, personal friendships, on the altar of military excellence. Her only companions were duty, discipline, and the unwavering respect of her subordinates. Fort Thunderridge sprawled across 100,000 acres of Nevada desert, a testament to American military might. The base housed the Army's most advanced tank training facility, where officers from around the world came to learn from the best. Elena's office walls were lined with commendations, photos with presidents and foreign dignitaries, and strategic maps marking every major armored engagement of the past 2 decades. But success at Elena's level came with a price that few understood. Every decision she made affected thousands of lives. Every tactical innovation she approved could mean the difference between victory and catastrophe in future conflicts. The weight of that responsibility had transformed her into something her younger self might not recognize, a brilliant, efficient machine focused solely on results. Her daily routine was regimented with military precision: 0500 hours physical training, 0600 hours intelligence briefings, 0700 hours strategic planning sessions. Every minute scheduled, every outcome measured, every emotion carefully controlled. She had no time for weakness, no space for doubt, and no tolerance for excuses. The 3 principles that governed Elena's command philosophy had served her well throughout her career. Demand perfection meant that mediocrity was not acceptable in life or death situations. Accept 0 failures ensured that her soldiers were prepared for the unforgiving reality of combat. Never show vulnerability maintained the confidence and morale necessary for effective leadership under pressure. These weren't just professional standards. They had become the foundation of Elena's identity. She was known throughout the Army as the Iron General, a leader who could accomplish the impossible through sheer force of will and strategic brilliance. Her soldiers would follow her into hell because they knew she would never ask them to do something she hadn't already done herself. Elena's corner office on the 3rd floor of the command building offered a panoramic view of the training grounds where the future of armored warfare was being written. Through her floor-to-ceiling windows, she could watch M1 Abrams tanks maneuvering through obstacle courses, new recruits learning to operate multi-million-dollar machines, and seasoned veterans passing down hard-earned battlefield wisdom. But lately, Elena found herself spending less time watching the training and more time focused on spreadsheets, congressional testimony preparation, and diplomatic correspondence. The higher she climbed, the further she moved from the hands-on leadership that had originally drawn her to the military. Command at her level meant managing budgets, not soldiers, analyzing reports, not terrain, attending meetings, not missions. Her personal life had withered in direct proportion to her professional success. She lived alone in base housing, ate most meals in her office, and hadn't taken a vacation in 4 years. Her family, parents and 2 siblings back in California, had long since stopped expecting her at holidays or family gatherings. The Army was her family, duty was her passion, and excellence was her only acceptable outcome. This isolation hadn't bothered Elena before. She viewed personal sacrifice as the price of leadership, a necessary trade-off for the privilege of serving at the highest levels. She had convinced herself that emotional attachments were weaknesses that compromised decision-making ability. Great leaders, she believed, had to stand apart from those they led. The irony was that Elena's greatest strength, her ability to solve complex problems through systematic analysis and unwavering determination, was about to meet a challenge that couldn't be conquered through traditional military thinking. The Predator's malfunction would force her into a world where her rank meant nothing, her resources were useless, and her carefully constructed identity would be stripped away layer by layer. In less than 36 hours, Elena would discover that the most important lessons in leadership sometimes come from the most unexpected teachers, in the most unlikely places, at the most desperate moments. The first sign that something was catastrophically wrong came during what should have been routine morning maneuvers. Staff Sergeant David Kim had been piloting the Predator through a standard obstacle course when every screen in the tank's cockpit suddenly went black. The massive war machine coasted to a stop in the middle of the Nevada desert, its revolutionary systems as lifeless as ancient stone. "General, you need to see this." Chief Engineer Patterson's voice carried an edge of panic that Elena had never heard before. She was reviewing tactical reports when the call came through her secure line at 0627 hours. "The Predator is completely unresponsive. We're talking about total system failure across every platform." Elena's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. The Predator represented 7 years of research and development, incorporating breakthrough technologies that would define the next generation of armored warfare. Its experimental fusion reactor could power the tank for months without refueling. Its AI-assisted targeting system could engage multiple threats simultaneously while automatically adjusting for weather, terrain, and enemy countermeasures. The electromagnetic railgun could punch through any known armor at distances previously thought impossible. More than advanced technology, the Predator was Elena's legacy. She had overseen every aspect of its development, from initial concept to final testing. Her signature was on every approval document. Her strategic vision had guided its capabilities. If the Predator failed during Operation Ironclad, it wouldn't just be a technical malfunction, it would be a public repudiation of everything she had built. "Define total system failure," Elena commanded, already reaching for her service cap. In her world, problems had solutions. Systems could be repaired, components could be replaced, and obstacles could be overcome through superior planning and execution. "Ma'am, the main engine won't turn over. The fusion reactor is in complete shutdown mode. All electronic systems are dark. Even the manual hydraulics aren't responding. It's like someone flipped a master switch and turned off everything at once." Elena was moving before Patterson finished speaking. She crossed the command center with military precision, her subordinates falling into step behind her as she headed for the motor pool. Outside, the Nevada sun was already beating down with the intensity that would reach 115 degrees by afternoon. But Elena barely noticed the heat as she climbed into her staff vehicle for the short drive to where her magnificent war machine sat silent. The scene at the training grounds resembled a high-tech archaeological dig. The Predator, all 70 tons of revolutionary engineering, sat motionless while teams of specialists crawled over its surface like ants, exploring a fallen giant. Diagnostic equipment worth millions of dollars was scattered around the tank, cables snaking across the desert sand like electronic ivy. The air buzzed with radio chatter, urgent conversations, and the whine of cooling fans fighting the desert heat. Dr. Patterson met Elena at the perimeter, sweat already staining his uniform despite the early hour. Behind him, Elena could see her team of 40 engineers, the best technical minds the military could assemble. These weren't ordinary mechanics or even typical military technicians. They represented the elite, PhD holders from Stanford and MIT, former NASA engineers, specialists who had designed the systems they were now desperately trying to resurrect. Honshrizu. Report, Elena demanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to receiving immediate, accurate information. Patterson consulted his tablet, scrolling through screens of data that should have told them everything they needed to know. Instead, the reading seemed to mock their expertise. General, I've been working on advanced military systems for 22 years, and I've never seen anything like this. Every individual component tests perfectly. The fusion reactor shows all systems nominal. The computer networks pass every diagnostic. The hydraulics have full pressure. The electrical systems show proper voltage throughout. Elena studied the Predator, trying to identify some visual clue that her trained eye might catch. The tank looked exactly as it should. Pristine, powerful, ready for battle. Its adaptive camouflage was functioning perfectly, shifting colors to match the desert environment. The main gun was properly seated. The armor panels showed no signs of damage or stress. But, Elena prompted, sensing the unspoken problem that Patterson was struggling to articulate. But when we try to start the engine, absolutely nothing happens. When we attempt to power up the electronics, the screens remain dark. When we engage the hydraulics, nothing moves. It's like the tank has forgotten how to be a tank. Elena walked slowly around the Predator, her trained eyes searching for answers that her engineers couldn't provide. She had spent countless hours studying this machine, understanding every system, memorizing every capability. The Predator was more than military hardware. It was the culmination of American technological superiority, designed to dominate battlefields for the next 50 years. Major Lisa Santos, Elena's aide-de-camp, approached with a secured satellite phone. "General, I have General Thompson from the Pentagon." Elena took the phone, knowing that the conversation would only increase the pressure she was already feeling. "Thompson." "Elena, I'm calling about Operation Ironclad. Please tell me the Predator situation is resolved." Elena watched her engineers working with increasing desperation, pulling access panels and running tests that had already failed multiple times. "Sir, we're experiencing some technical difficulties, but…" "Elena, I need you to understand something. The Secretary of Defense personally guaranteed to our allies that they would see the Predator in action. We have defense ministers from 12 countries arriving tomorrow night. Congress has approved a potential sale package worth $47 billion based on the capabilities we've promised to demonstrate." The weight of those numbers settled on Elena's shoulders like concrete. $47 billion, 12 allied nations, the Secretary of Defense's personal guarantee. Her career, her reputation, and America's military credibility all rested on getting one tank to start. "General Thompson, I have 40 of the finest engineers in the military working on this problem. We will find a solution." "Elena, I've known you for 8 years. You've never failed to deliver on a promise. Don't start now. Whatever resources you need, whatever support I can provide, it's yours. But that tank better be roaring like a lion when those defense ministers arrive." As Elena ended the call, she realized that conventional military thinking, the systematic approach that had served her throughout her career, might not be enough. The Predator's failure wasn't following the normal rules of mechanical breakdown. It wasn't responding to traditional diagnostic procedures or repair protocols. For the first time in her military career, General Elena Rodriguez was facing a problem that couldn't be solved through superior firepower, better strategy, or more resources. She was about to discover that sometimes the most complex problems require the simplest solutions, and that wisdom doesn't always come with advanced degrees or impressive credentials. The secure conference room in the command building felt like a war tribunal as Elena faced the video screens displaying Pentagon officials, defense contractors, and military leaders from across the globe. At 1,400 hours, exactly 30 hours before Operation Ironclad was scheduled to begin, the reality of what failure would mean was becoming devastatingly clear. Secretary of Defense William Harrison's face filled the primary monitor, his expression grim as stone. Behind him, Elena could see the familiar backdrop of his Pentagon office, where decisions affecting global security were made daily. "General Rodriguez, I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with here. Is this a minor technical glitch, or are we looking at a fundamental system failure?" Elena stood at attention, even though she was addressing the screen. In the military, respect was shown through posture and protocol, regardless of the medium. Mr. Secretary, we're experiencing an unprecedented malfunction. Every diagnostic indicates the tank should be operational, but it remains completely unresponsive to all commands. General, let me paint the full picture for you, Harrison continued, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent 40 years in defense policy. Operation Ironclad isn't just a demonstration, it's the cornerstone of our strategic alliance initiative for the next decade. We have defense ministers arriving from the United Kingdom, Germany, Japan, South Korea, Australia, Poland, Turkey, the Netherlands, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland. These aren't routine military observers. These are decision-makers authorized to sign contracts worth a combined $47 billion. The number hit Elena like artillery fire. $47 billion represented more than the GDP of some countries. It was funding that would support American jobs, strengthen allied relationships, and maintain technological superiority for the next generation of warfare. Admiral Sarah Mitchell, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, appeared on a secondary screen from her office in the Pentagon. Elena, the Predator program represents 7 years of development and $14 billion in research investment. But more importantly, it represents America's commitment to providing our allies with the most advanced defensive capabilities available. If we can't deliver on that promise, we're not just losing a sale, we're damaging the trust that forms the foundation of NATO and our Pacific partnerships. Elena felt the weight of every star on her collar, every ribbon on her chest, every oath she had taken throughout her career. Military leadership meant accepting responsibility not just for your immediate command, but for the broader mission that extended far beyond any single base or operation. Dr. Jonathan Reeves from Meridian Defense Systems, the primary contractor for the Predator program, joined the conference from his corporate headquarters in Colorado. His company had invested billions in developing the tank's revolutionary systems, betting their future on the success of Operation Ironclad. General, our international partners have made significant financial commitments based on the capabilities we've demonstrated in controlled testing. If we fail to deliver tomorrow, Meridian could face bankruptcy within 6 months. We're talking about 47,000 jobs across 12 states. The human cost was staggering. Elena had always understood that military decisions affected lives, but she typically thought in terms of soldiers under her command. Now she was confronting the reality that her failure could devastate entire communities of defense workers, engineers, and support staff who had dedicated years to making the Predator a reality. Colonel Marcus Webb from Army Intelligence provided the strategic context that made Elena's stomach tighten further. Ma'am, our intelligence indicates that both China and Russia are accelerating their own next-generation tank programs. The Predator represents a 15-year technological advantage over anything currently deployed by potential adversaries. If our allies lose confidence in American military technology and turn to alternative suppliers, we could see a fundamental shift in global military balance. The geopolitical implications were enormous. American military dominance wasn't just about having the best equipment. It was about ensuring that allied nations trusted American technology enough to build their defense strategies around it. That trust, carefully cultivated over decades, could be shattered by a single failed demonstration. Elena's aide-de-camp, Major Santos, slid a folder across the conference table. Inside were detailed profiles of each arriving defense minister, along with intelligence assessments of their countries, military needs, and budget constraints. These weren't abstract numbers on a spreadsheet. They were real leaders making decisions that would affect their nation's security for decades to come. Minister Klaus Richter from Germany was dealing with increasing pressure to modernize his country's aging tank fleet. His parliament had already approved funding based on Predator capabilities. Minister Takeshi Yamamoto from Japan was facing growing tensions in the Pacific and needed advanced armor to counter regional threats. Minister Sarah Campbell from the United Kingdom was fighting budget cuts and needed to prove that new tank purchases would provide superior value compared to upgrades of existing systems. General, Secretary Harrison continued, I need you to understand that this isn't just about one demonstration or one contract. The credibility of American military technology is on trial. If the Predator fails, it sends a message to every ally and every adversary that our most advanced systems can't be trusted when it matters most. Elena studied the faces on the screens, leaders who had trusted her, colleagues who had supported her rise through the ranks. contractors who had risked everything on her assurances that the Predator would perform as promised. The weight of their expectations felt heavier than the tank itself. General Thompson's voice cut through Elena's thoughts. "Elena, I've reviewed your service record. You've never failed a mission in 23 years of service. You've led soldiers through combat, managed complex logistics operations, and solved problems that others considered impossible. But I need to know, can you fix this?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Elena looked around the conference room at her staff, all waiting for the confident answer they had come to expect from their commanding officer. She thought about the 40 engineers working desperately in the desert heat, the millions of dollars in diagnostic equipment that had provided no answers, and the ticking clock that marked each passing hour as another step toward potential disaster. "Mr. Secretary, I will find a solution," Elena said, her voice carrying more conviction than she felt. "Failure is not an option." As the conference ended and the screens went dark, Elena remained standing in the empty room, fully understanding for the first time that her next 30 hours would determine not just her own future, but the technological partnership between America and its closest allies. The Predator had to run, or everything she had worked to build would come crashing down around her. By 1,800 hours, the scene around the Predator resembled a high-tech emergency room, where every specialist had been called in but the patient refused to respond to treatment. Elena watched as her carefully assembled team of experts implemented increasingly desperate measures, each failure driving them deeper into uncharted territory. Dr. Patterson had called in reinforcements from 3 different military installations. The expanded team now included Dr. Angela Foster, the Army's leading expert on fusion reactor technology from Aberdeen Proving Ground, and Chief Warrant Officer Robert Chen, who had designed the Predator's electronic warfare systems at Fort Belvoir. These weren't backup players. They were the original architects of the systems that were now failing them. "We're going to attempt a complete system restart," Dr. Foster announced, her voice tight with concentration. She had flown in from Maryland specifically for this crisis, bringing with her diagnostic equipment that existed nowhere else in the world. The fusion reactor she had helped design was theoretically foolproof, with 7 independent safety systems and redundant power pathways that should have made total failure impossible. Elena watched as Foster's team began the painstaking process of manually resetting every system in sequence. First, they completely shut down the fusion reactor, waiting the required 47 minutes for the cool-down cycle to complete. The reactor's status displays showed perfect normal readings throughout the process. Temperature curves exactly matching specifications, radiation levels within acceptable parameters, magnetic containment fields stable and strong. When they attempted to restart the reactor, the initial ignition sequence began normally. Plasma temperatures rose on schedule, magnetic fields engaged in proper sequence. But at the moment when fusion should have begun sustaining itself, everything simply stopped. Not failed, not exploded, not triggered safety protocols, just stopped, as if someone had pressed an invisible pause button on reality itself. "This is impossible," Foster muttered, staring at readings that defied every principle of physics she understood. "The plasma is at the correct temperature. The magnetic containment is perfect. The deuterium-tritium mixture is precisely calibrated. Fusion should be occurring, but it's not." Meanwhile, Chief Chen was attacking the problem from the electronic systems angle. He had personally programmed many of the Predator's software protocols, writing millions of lines of code that governed everything from target acquisition to maintenance schedules. If anyone could diagnose a software malfunction, it would be him. "General, I'm going to attempt a complete firmware reload," Chen reported, connecting a specialized diagnostic computer to the tank's main processing unit. "We'll wipe every software system and reinstall from verified backup copies." The process took 4 hours. Chen methodically erased and reinstalled every piece of software, every driver, every protocol that made the Predator more than an expensive sculpture. Elena paced in the command tent that had been erected beside the silent tank, monitoring progress reports that grew increasingly frustrated as the night wore on. When the software reload completed at 0200 hours, Chen's team attempted to boot the system. Once again, every diagnostic showed perfect results. The computers came online exactly as programmed. The software loaded without errors. All self-tests passed with flying colors. But when they sent the command to start the engine, nothing happened. It's like the software and hardware are speaking different languages, Chen reported, exhaustion evident in his voice. The commands are being sent correctly. The receiving systems acknowledge the commands, but somehow the actual mechanical responses never occur. Dr. Amanda Voss from MIT's Lincoln Laboratory arrived at 0300 hours with a team of graduate students and enough specialized equipment to fill 2 cargo planes. Voss had earned her reputation solving impossible problems for DARPA, and her arrival brought a surge of hope to Elena's increasingly desperate team. "We're going to approach this as a pure physics problem," Voss announced. "Forget about normal troubleshooting procedures. Something is preventing the conversion of electrical signals into mechanical action, and we're going to find out what." Voss's team began measurements that went far beyond standard military protocols. They analyzed electromagnetic fields around the tank, checked for unusual radiation signatures, measured gravitational anomalies, and even tested for quantum interference patterns. Their equipment was so sensitive it could detect the electrical activity in Elena's brain from 50 meters away. The results were both fascinating and terrifying. Every measurement showed that the Predator was functioning perfectly at the quantum level. Electrons were flowing exactly as they should. Electromagnetic fields were properly aligned. Quantum states were stable and predictable. Yet somehow, this perfect microscopic activity was failing to translate into macroscopic mechanical function. General Voss reported after 6 hours of intensive testing, "I've never seen anything like this. It's as if there's a barrier between the atomic level and the mechanical level. Everything works until it needs to create actual physical motion, and then it just doesn't." As dawn broke over the Nevada desert, Elena found herself facing the impossible. She had assembled the finest technical minds available, deployed diagnostic equipment worth more than most countries, defense budgets, and systematically tested every component of the most advanced tank ever built. Every test indicated that the Predator should work perfectly. Every diagnostic suggested that nothing was wrong. Yet the tank remained as silent and motionless as it had been 18 hours earlier. Colonel Hayes approached Elena's position in the command tent, carrying another stack of failure reports. "Ma'am, Dr. Patterson wants to try one more approach. He's suggesting we completely disassemble the main engine and rebuild it from scratch." Elena looked out at the Predator, sitting in the growing heat of another Nevada morning. In 8 hours, defense ministers from 12 countries would begin arriving for Operation Ironclad. In 26 hours, they would expect to see America's most advanced tank demonstrate capabilities that would reshape modern warfare. How long would complete disassembly take, Elena asked, though she already knew the answer would be devastating. "Minimum 72 hours, ma'am. And that's assuming we find the problem during disassembly." Elena felt something crack inside her chest, not physically, but emotionally. For the first time in her military career, she was confronting the reality that superior planning, unlimited resources, and expert knowledge might not be enough. The systematic approach that had carried her from enlisted soldier to general was failing her when she needed it most. "Continue current diagnostic procedures," she ordered. "I need to explore alternative options." As Elena walked away from the command tent, she realized she was about to do something that violated every principle of leadership she had learned in 23 years of military service. She was going to admit that she needed help from someone outside her carefully controlled world of military expertise and advanced technology. The question was, where could she possibly find someone capable of solving a problem that had defeated 40 of the finest engineers in America? Elena's secure phone rang every 20 minutes throughout the morning, each call bringing fresh waves of pressure that threatened to crush what remained of her confidence. At 0800 hours, it was General Thompson again, his voice carrying barely controlled tension. "Elena, I need an honest assessment. What are the odds we'll have a functioning tank by tomorrow evening?" Elena stood in her temporary command post, surrounded by status boards that told the same story of failure in dozens of different ways. Through the reinforced windows, she could see her team of engineers huddled around diagnostic equipment, their body language screaming defeat even from a distance. "Sir, we're exploring every possible avenue, but I have to be honest. Conventional approaches aren't working." "Elena, I'm not calling for updates. I'm calling because Secretary Harrison is demanding contingency plans." The President's daily briefing this morning included Operation Ironclad. Do you understand what that means? The President of the United States knows about your tank problem. The revelation hit Elena like a physical blow. Presidential awareness meant that failure would have consequences extending far beyond her military career. It meant congressional hearings, inspector general investigations, and public scrutiny of every decision she had made. Her reputation, carefully built over 2 decades, could be destroyed in a matter of hours. At 0930 hours, Dr. Reeves from Meridian Defense Systems called with news that made Elena's stomach drop. "General, I've just finished briefing our board of directors. Our stock price has already dropped 12% based on rumors about technical difficulties. If Operation Ironclad fails, we're looking at potential Chapter 11 bankruptcy filing by the end of the month." Elena had never considered the civilian casualties of military failure. Behind every defense contract were real people, engineers, factory workers, administrative staff, whose livelihoods depended on the success of programs like the Predator. Thousands of families across America would suffer if she couldn't solve this problem. "Dr. Reeves, what kind of support can your company provide? Additional engineers, specialized equipment, anything that might help." "General, I've already dispatched our emergency response team from Colorado. They'll arrive by 1400 hours with equipment we normally reserve for NASA projects. But I have to tell you, our best people helped design these systems originally. If they couldn't prevent this problem, I'm not sure they can solve it now." The international pressure was building as well. Major Santos approached Elena's position with a briefing folder marked, "Eyes Only, Urgent." Inside were diplomatic cables that painted a picture of growing concern among America's closest allies. "Ma'am, this just came in from the State Department," Santos reported. "The British Defense Minister is questioning whether to proceed with the Predator purchase. The German delegation is asking for technical specifications to conduct their own evaluation. The Japanese are requesting assurances that this isn't indicative of broader quality control issues." Elena read through the cables, each one representing years of diplomatic relationship building that was now at risk. These weren't just military partnerships. They were strategic alliances that affected trade, intelligence sharing, and collective security arrangements. America's role as the leader of the free world depended partly on its ability to provide reliable military technology to its allies. At 1200 hours, the pressure took a personal turn when Elena's phone displayed a number she hadn't seen in months, her father's cell phone. Colonel Miguel Rodriguez, retired, was calling from his home in San Antonio, where he spent his days tending a small garden and reading military history. "Mija," her father's familiar voice carried the warmth that Elena had almost forgotten existed. "I saw something on the news about problems at Fort Thunderridge. Everything okay?" Elena stepped away from her staff, seeking a moment of privacy in the chaos surrounding her. Her father had been her first military mentor, teaching her that leadership meant taking responsibility for both success and failure. But she had never failed at anything this important before. "Papa, I'm dealing with a technical problem that's proving more difficult than expected," Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady. She couldn't bring herself to admit the full scope of the crisis to the man who had taught her that Rodriguez women didn't make excuses. "You know, when I was in Vietnam, we had a tank that wouldn't start right before a major operation. Turned out the problem wasn't technical at all, it was human. Sometimes the most complicated problems have the simplest solutions, but you have to be willing to look beyond what you think you know." Her father's words carried weight that Elena wasn't ready to process. Throughout her career, she had solved problems through superior knowledge, better resources, and more systematic approaches. The idea that this crisis might require a fundamentally different kind of thinking was both terrifying and intriguing. At 1400 hours, the media pressure reached critical levels when CNN reported that Operation Ironclad was experiencing, quote, "significant technical difficulties." Within an hour, defense correspondents from every major news outlet were calling the base public affairs office, demanding interviews and explanations. Colonel Sarah Martinez, Fort Thunderridge's public affairs officer, brought Elena the latest media assessment. "Ma'am, the story is going international. Defense News is running a front-page article titled, 'America's Supertank Fails Before Crucial Demo.' The Times of London is questioning the reliability of American military exports. We're getting calls from reporters in 12 countries." Elena realized that her private crisis was becoming a public disaster. Every hour of continued failure was being broadcast to the world, undermining confidence in American military technology and her own leadership capabilities. The pressure was no longer just professional. It was becoming a matter of national embarrassment. At 1,600 hours, 16 hours before the first defense ministers were scheduled to arrive, Elena received the call she had been dreading most. General Thompson's voice carried the weight of someone delivering an ultimatum. "Elena, I've just finished a conference call with the Secretary of Defense and the National Security Advisor. We need a definitive answer. Can you fix this tank or not?" Elena looked out at the Predator, still sitting silently in the desert heat, surrounded by millions of dollars in diagnostic equipment and dozens of frustrated experts. Her career, her reputation, and America's military credibility all rested on finding a solution that had eluded the finest technical minds available. "Sir, I need more time to explore unconventional approaches," Elena said, the words feeling like surrender even as she spoke them. "Elena, you don't have more time, you have 16 hours. After that, we'll have to cancel Operation Ironclad and face the consequences. Find a solution, General. That's an order." As Elena ended the call, she realized that everything she had built, everything she had achieved, and everything she believed about leadership was about to be tested in ways she had never imagined. The next few hours would determine whether she was truly the leader she thought she was, or whether she had simply been fortunate enough never to face an impossible problem before. Desperation makes strange decisions seem reasonable. At 1,730 hours, with less than 15 hours remaining before the arrival of international defense ministers, Elena found herself doing something that violated every protocol of her military career. She was leaving the base without authorization, driving alone into the Nevada desert in search of help that might not exist. The idea had come from an unexpected source. Master Sergeant Frank Williams, the grizzled veteran who managed Fort Thunderridge's motor pool, had approached Elena during her third consecutive inspection of the silent Predator. Williams had 32 years of military service, most of it spent keeping vehicles running in conditions that would challenge even the most sophisticated machinery. "General, if I may speak freely," Williams had said, his weathered face serious beneath his service cap. "I've seen machines do impossible things, and I've seen machines refuse to do simple things. Sometimes the problem isn't in the machine, it's in how we're thinking about the machine." Elena had been in no mood for philosophy, but Williams continued. "There's a fellow in Copper Springs, about 40 minutes south of here, Miguel Santos. He runs a little garage where folks take their vehicles when nobody else can fix them. I've seen him resurrect trucks that trained mechanics had declared dead. Might be worth a conversation." The suggestion should have been absurd. Elena Rodriguez, general in the United States Army, seeking help from a small-town mechanic for a $12 million tank that had defeated MIT engineers. But as she sat in her command post, watching her 40 experts continue to fail, Williams's words echoed her father's advice about looking beyond what she thought she knew. Elena's staff vehicle climbed the winding road out of Fort Thunderridge as the Nevada sun began its descent toward the desert horizon. She had told Major Santos that she was conducting a reconnaissance mission, which was technically true, though not in any way the Army had ever defined reconnaissance. Her secure radio remained silent. For the first time in 23 years of service, she was completely alone, without staff, without advisors, without the safety net of military hierarchy. Copper Springs appeared on the horizon like a mirage that refused to disappear as she approached. The town consisted of perhaps 24 buildings scattered along a single main street, their sun-bleached facades telling stories of better times when mining and ranching had provided prosperity. A faded sign announced a population of 847, though Elena suspected the actual number was considerably lower. Santos Auto Repair occupied a corner lot where the main street intersected with what optimistically called itself Highway 447. The building had probably been constructed in the 1960s. Its corrugated metal siding painted a color that might once have been blue but now resembled the patina of aged copper. A hand-painted sign over the main bay door declared, "Santos Auto Repair, no job too big, no problem too small." Beneath it, someone had added in smaller letters, "Family-owned since 1987. Elena parked her military vehicle beside a collection of civilian cars and trucks in various stages of repair. A 1990s Ford pickup with its hood raised sat next to a school bus that had seen better decades. An ancient Volkswagen Beetle occupied the far corner of the lot, its engine apparently distributed across several workbenches inside the open garage. The sound of impact wrenches and Spanish-language radio drifted from the garage as Elena approached. The contrast between this environment and the high-tech command center she had left behind was so stark, it felt like stepping into a different century. Where Fort Thunderridge hummed with digital displays and computerized diagnostics, Santos Auto Repair operated with hand tools, intuition, and what appeared to be several decades of accumulated mechanical wisdom. Miguel Santos emerged from beneath the raised hood of a delivery truck, wiping his hands on a shop rag that had probably been white sometime in the distant past. He was shorter than Elena had expected, perhaps 5 feet 8 inches, with the compact build of someone who had spent years maneuvering in tight spaces around machinery. His dark hair was streaked with premature gray, and his brown eyes held the kind of patient intelligence that Elena had learned to recognize in master sergeants and senior technicians. "Afternoon," Miguel said, his voice carrying a slight accent that spoke of family roots extending south of the border. "You're not from around here." It was an observation, not a question. Elena's bearing, her perfectly pressed uniform, and her obvious discomfort in civilian surroundings marked her as clearly as if she wore a neon sign. "I'm General Rodriguez from Fort Thunderridge," Elena said, then immediately wondered why she had felt the need to announce her rank. In this environment, surrounded by the honest smell of motor oil and the practical reality of machines that actually needed to work, military hierarchy seemed somehow irrelevant. Miguel nodded politely, showing neither the deference Elena usually received, nor the suspicion she might have expected. "Fort Thunderridge, that's the tank place, right? My oldest boy, Carlos. He's always talking about joining the army, maybe working on those big machines you have up there." Elena looked around the garage, taking in details that her military training automatically cataloged. The workspace was organized with an efficiency that would impress any logistics officer, every tool precisely placed for maximum accessibility. But the equipment itself belonged to an earlier era of automotive repair: manual hydraulic lifts, analog testing equipment, and diagnostic tools that required hands-on experience rather than computer interfaces. "Mr. Santos, I understand you have a reputation for fixing vehicles that other mechanics can't repair," Elena said, trying to find words that wouldn't sound ridiculous when applied to her current situation. Miguel's weathered hands continued cleaning the shop rag, a gesture Elena recognized as the universal mechanic's response to thinking time. "Depends on what's broken and why it's broken," he said finally. "What kind of vehicle are we talking about?" Elena realized she was about to ask a small-town auto mechanic to solve a problem that had defeated the combined expertise of the Army's most advanced engineers. The absurdity of the situation should have sent her back to her vehicle and her proper military channels. Instead, she found herself thinking about her father's words, and Master Sergeant Williams's suggestion that sometimes the problem wasn't in the machine. "Mr. Santos, I have a vehicle that's experiencing a very unusual malfunction. All the diagnostics indicate it should work perfectly, but it won't respond to any commands. 40 of the Army's finest engineers have been working on it for over 20 hours without success." Miguel set down his shop rag and gave Elena his full attention. "What kind of vehicle won't start when everything says it should?" Elena took a breath, realizing that her next words would either begin the most unconventional repair consultation in military history or confirm that desperation had finally driven her completely beyond reason. "Mr. Santos," she said, "I need your help fixing a tank." Miguel Santos stared at Elena for a long moment, his expression shifting from polite attention to something resembling concern for her mental well-being. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant sound of a compressor cycling and the tinny music from a radio somewhere in the depths of the garage. "Ma'am," Miguel said carefully, the way someone might address a person who had just claimed to see UFOs. "I work on cars and trucks, sometimes farm equipment. Last month I fixed a school bus that wouldn't shift out of second gear. But I've never even seen a military tank up close, much less worked on one." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, the flush of embarrassment that came with realizing how desperate she must sound, standing in this humble garage, surrounded by the practical reality of automotive repair. Her request seemed not just unreasonable but absurd. What was she thinking? That some magical mechanic in a desert town could solve problems that had defeated teams of PhD engineers? "Mr. Santos, I understand how this must sound," Elena began, but Miguel was already shaking his head. General, with all due respect, I think maybe you're more stressed than you realize. A tank isn't like a delivery truck or even a bulldozer. Those machines you have up at the base, they're full of computers and electronics and systems I've never heard of. I fix carburetors and alternators and brake lines. Basic stuff. Miguel gestured around his garage, pointing out the obvious limitations that Elena's desperation had somehow overlooked. Look at this place. I don't have fancy diagnostic computers. I don't have testing equipment that costs more than my house. Hell, my newest tool is probably older than your youngest soldier. Elena followed his gesture, seeing the garage through eyes unclouded by desperation for the first time. The hydraulic lift was indeed ancient, probably installed when the building was new. The diagnostic equipment consisted of a basic multimeter, a compression tester, and various gauges that required manual interpretation. There wasn't a single computer in sight, no digital displays, no sophisticated analysis software. Besides, Miguel continued, warming to his theme, even if I knew something about tanks, which I don't, how would I get to the base? You think they're gonna let some mechanic from Copper Springs just walk onto a military installation and start poking around classified equipment? The practical obstacles were mounting faster than Elena could address them. Security clearances, base access protocols, the chain of command that would never approve such an irregular consultation. Even if Miguel agreed to help, which he clearly wasn't going to do, the logistics would be impossible. General, you seem like a nice lady, but I think you need to go back to your base and let your engineers figure this out. That's what you pay them for, right? Elena's phone buzzed with another urgent text from Major Santos. International delegates asking for status updates. Need your location. The reminder of her rapidly approaching deadline made Miguel's reasonable refusal feel like a door slamming shut on her last hope. Mr. Santos, I know how this sounds, but… Ma'am, Miguel interrupted gently, let me tell you something. I got 3 kids to feed and a business to run. Carlos is 17, wants to go to college. Maria is 15, plays violin in the school orchestra, needs money for music camp this summer. Little Anna is 12. Just made the honor roll. I can't afford to waste time on something that's not my job and not my problem. The mention of his children brought Elena face to face with another reality she had overlooked. Miguel Santos wasn't just a mechanic. He was a single father with responsibilities that made her military obligations seem simple by comparison. She was asking him to abandon his paying work and his family obligations to chase after a problem that trained experts couldn't solve. I understand, Elena said, feeling the last of her hope draining away. I'm sorry to have bothered you. She turned toward her vehicle, mentally preparing for the drive back to Fort Thunderridge, and the humiliating admission that she had exhausted every option, including some that weren't really options at all. In less than 14 hours, she would face the most important demonstration of her career, with a broken tank and no solutions. General, wait a minute, Miguel called after her. Elena turned back, not daring to hope, but unable to stop herself from listening. Miguel was studying her with the same careful attention he might give to a particularly puzzling mechanical problem. You said 40 engineers can't figure this out? 42, actually, including the original designers of most systems. And everything tests normal, but nothing works? Every diagnostic shows perfect function. Every component tests within specifications. The tank just won't respond to any commands. Miguel frowned, his mechanic's instincts clearly engaged despite his reluctance. That's weird. Real weird. In 30 years of fixing things, I've only seen a few problems like that. Usually it's something simple that everybody's overlooking because they're thinking too complicated. Elena felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. What kind of simple things? Well, Miguel said slowly, clearly thinking out loud, I had a guy bring me a brand new truck once. $50,000 pickup, wouldn't start. Dealership spent 2 weeks on it, brought in factory experts, replaced half the engine, still wouldn't start. What was wrong with it? Miguel's weather-beaten face cracked into the first smile Elena had seen since arriving. Dead battery, brand new truck, dead battery. All their fancy computers told them the electrical system was fine because they were plugged into wall power for testing. Nobody thought to check if the battery could actually hold a charge. The story seemed too simple. But Elena had spent enough time around senior NCOs to recognize the wisdom that came from decades of practical experience. You think our problem might be something equally basic? Could be. But here's the thing, General. I wouldn't know where to start looking on a military tank. Your people probably have procedures and protocols and security requirements that would take me months to learn, if they'd even let me learn them. Elena's mind was racing now, trying to bridge the gap between Miguel's practical wisdom and the security constraints of military technology. There had to be a way to tap into his different perspective without compromising classified systems or violating base security. Mr. Santos, what if I could arrange for you to look at the tank without requiring security clearance? What if you could examine the problem without accessing any classified systems? Miguel looked skeptical. How would that work? Elena wasn't sure, but for the first time in 24 hours, she felt like she might be approaching the problem from a useful angle. I don't know yet, but I'm willing to find out, if you're willing to try. Miguel glanced toward the back of the garage, where Elena could hear the sounds of children's voices and someone preparing dinner. His family was waiting for him, just as her country was waiting for her to solve an impossible problem. General, Miguel said finally, I'll make you a deal. Miguel's deal was simpler than Elena had expected, and more complicated than she was prepared for. I'll come take a look at your tank, he said, wiping his hands one final time on the shop rag. But I'm bringing my kids, and this counts as their educational field trip for the month. Carlos has been talking about military service, and the girls have never seen anything bigger than a school bus. Deal? Elena's mind immediately jumped to security protocols, visitor procedures, and the dozen regulations that would be violated by bringing civilian children onto a restricted military installation during a classified operation. Then she thought about the 42 engineers who had already failed, the defense ministers arriving in 13 hours, and the reality that conventional approaches had been exhausted. Deal, she said, surprising herself with how quickly the word emerged. The drive back to Fort Thunderridge in convoy, Elena's staff vehicle followed by Miguel's battered pickup truck containing a family that had no idea they were about to participate in the most unconventional military consultation in recent history, gave Elena time to consider the enormity of what she was attempting. She was violating protocols that existed for good reasons, trusting classified technology to a civilian with no security clearance, and gambling her career on the intuition of a small-town mechanic. But as they approached the main gate of Fort Thunderridge, Elena found herself thinking about her father's words about looking beyond what she thought she knew. Miguel Santos might not have advanced degrees or sophisticated equipment, but he had something her team of experts lacked, a completely different perspective on mechanical problems. The base security checkpoint presented the first challenge Elena hadn't fully considered. Staff Sergeant Monica Torres, the senior guard on duty, approached Elena's vehicle with the professional efficiency of someone who had processed thousands of routine base entries. Her expression shifted to puzzlement when she saw the civilian vehicle following the general's staff car. Ma'am, I don't have these visitors on my authorized list, Torres reported, consulting her computerized access control system. Should I process them as standard civilian contractors? Elena realized she was about to create the kind of irregular entry that would generate paperwork trails and questions from security personnel for months to come. Process them as emergency technical consultants under my personal authorization, she instructed, using authority she wasn't entirely sure she possessed. Torres's eyebrows rose slightly, but military discipline prevented any verbal questions. Yes, ma'am. I'll need identification from all passengers for temporary visitor badges. 5 minutes later, Miguel Santos and his 3 children were wearing bright red escort-required visitor badges that marked them as civilians requiring constant supervision while on base. Elena led the small convoy through Fort Thunderridge's main thoroughfare, passing formations of soldiers conducting evening exercises and rows of M1 Abrams tanks that suddenly seemed almost quaint compared to the advanced predator that awaited them. Carlos Santos, sitting in the front passenger seat of his father's truck, pressed his face against the window with the enthusiasm of a teenager seeing military hardware in person for the first time. Papa, look at those tanks. They're huge. Miguel smiled at his son's excitement while maintaining the careful focus on driving that Elena had noticed in his garage. Everything about the man suggested someone who approached new situations with methodical attention to detail, whether he was repairing a carburetor or navigating an unfamiliar military base. The scene that greeted them at the Predator's location had evolved into something resembling a medical emergency response. Portable floodlights illuminated the silent tank from every angle, casting harsh shadows across the desert sand. Dr. Patterson's team had expanded their diagnostic equipment array to include devices that Elena didn't recognize apparently borrowed from other research facilities across the country. Major Santos approached Elena's vehicle as she parked, her expression carefully neutral despite the obvious questions raised by the civilian family emerging from the pickup truck. "General, the engineers are requesting permission to attempt partial disassembly of the main engine block. Dr. Patterson believes there might be a physical obstruction that's not showing up on electronic diagnostics." Elena looked toward the Predator, where her team of experts continued their increasingly desperate efforts to resurrect the machine. How long would partial disassembly take? Minimum 8 hours for removal, unknown time for inspection, and another 8 hours for reassembly. We'd be cutting it very close to the demonstration timeline. Elena did the mathematics in her head. 16 hours minimum, for a procedure that might not even identify the problem, much less solve it. With less than 13 hours remaining before the arrival of international delegates, partial disassembly represented a gamble that could leave her with both a broken tank and one that was completely unusable. "Hold on the disassembly," Elena instructed. "I want to try a different approach first." Miguel had been listening to this exchange while his children stared in awe at the massive war machine before them. Elena watched his expression as he took in the scene, the sophisticated diagnostic equipment, the teams of frustrated engineers, the obvious complexity of the technological challenge they faced. "Mr. Santos, this is the Predator," Elena said, making formal introductions that felt surreal under the circumstances. "Dr. Patterson, Chief Engineer Chen, Dr. Foster, and the rest of my team. Gentlemen, this is Miguel Santos, a mechanical specialist I've consulted about our problem." The reaction from Elena's engineering team was immediate and unmistakable. Dr. Patterson's eyes widened with something approaching disbelief. Chief Chen looked from Miguel to Elena as if trying to determine whether this was some kind of elaborate joke. Dr. Foster simply stared, apparently speechless at the idea that a general was introducing a civilian auto mechanic as a consultant on the most advanced tank in the world. Miguel seemed unaware of the stir his presence was causing among the military engineers. He approached the Predator with the same careful, methodical attention he had shown while examining the delivery truck in his garage. But instead of immediately focusing on the tank's technical systems, he began walking slowly around the entire machine, studying it from every angle with eyes that saw things differently than trained military engineers. "Interesting," Miguel murmured, pausing near the tank's rear section. "Very interesting." Dr. Patterson stepped forward, clearly struggling to maintain professional courtesy while processing the unprecedented situation. "Mr. Santos, I should mention that many of the Predator's systems are classified. We'll need to be careful about what information we can share." Miguel nodded politely, still studying the tank. "Doctor, I don't need to know what this machine does or how it's supposed to work. I just need to understand why it's not working." Elena watched Miguel's examination with growing fascination. While her engineers had focused on electronic diagnostics and computer analysis, Miguel was approaching the problem like a doctor performing a physical examination. He wasn't trying to understand the Predator's advanced capabilities. He was trying to understand its basic mechanical health. "Carlos," Miguel called to his son, "come here and tell me what you see." Carlos approached the tank with teenager enthusiasm, his eyes wide with excitement. "It's enormous, Papa. How much does it weigh?" "About 70 tons, Elena provided. "But look more carefully. What do you notice about how it's sitting?" Carlos walked around the front of the tank, following his father's example of careful observation. "It looks, I don't know, maybe a little tilted, like it's leaning forward just a tiny bit." Miguel nodded approvingly. "Good eye, son. What else?" Elena found herself holding her breath, wondering what a 17-year-old with no military training could possibly notice that 42 expert engineers had missed. But as she looked at the Predator through fresh eyes, she began to see what Miguel and Carlos were observing, subtle details that her team had overlooked while focusing on sophisticated diagnostic procedures. Miguel Santos was now lying flat on his back beneath the front of the Predator, using a flashlight borrowed from one of Elena's engineers to examine something that had captured his attention. His muffled voice called out from underneath the 70-ton machine, "General, how long has this tank been sitting in exactly this position?" Elena consulted with Dr. Patterson, who checked his maintenance logs. "Approximately 36 hours. It hasn't moved since the malfunction occurred during yesterday morning's exercise." "And before that, how often was it moved?" "The Predator has been in almost continuous operation for the past 2 weeks, field testing, system calibration, crew training for the demonstration. Miguel emerged from beneath the tank, his borrowed flashlight revealing something in his expression that Elena couldn't quite identify. It wasn't excitement exactly, but rather the focused intensity of someone who had just discovered a critical piece of a puzzle that everyone else had been looking at upside down. "Dr. Patterson," Miguel said, his voice carrying a quiet confidence that made Elena's pulse quicken. "What kind of weight distribution does this tank have? Front to back, I mean." Patterson consulted his technical specifications, clearly puzzled by the direction of Miguel's inquiry. "The Predator is designed with optimal weight distribution for maximum stability. Approximately 42% front, 58% rear, accounting for the main gun placement and ammunition storage." "And what happens if that distribution gets thrown off?" "Well, theoretically, improper weight distribution could affect mobility, firing accuracy, and overall stability. But the Predator's advanced suspension system automatically compensates for minor variations in load distribution." Miguel nodded slowly, then did something that made Dr. Patterson visibly wince. He began knocking on various sections of the tank's armor with his knuckles, the way a doctor might tap on a patient's chest to check for fluid in the lungs. The metallic ringing sounds varied subtly as he moved from section to section. "Mr. Santos," Dr. Chen interrupted nervously, "I should mention that the armor plating is extremely sensitive to impact. Even minor damage could compromise the tank's protective capabilities." Miguel paused in his unconventional examination. "Chief, I'm not hitting it hard enough to damage anything. I'm listening for differences in density, checking for internal shifting or settlement that might not show up on your computer diagnostics." Elena watched Miguel's methodical investigation with growing fascination. While her engineers had been analyzing electronic signals and software protocols, Miguel was treating the Predator like a massive mechanical patient, using techniques that predated computer diagnostics by decades. "Carlos, Maria, Ana," Miguel called to his children, who had been watching the proceedings with wide-eyed amazement. "I need your help. You're going to help me listen for something that the grown-ups might have missed." Elena's engineering team exchanged glances that ranged from skeptical to openly concerned. The idea that children could contribute to solving a technical problem that had defeated PhD-level experts seemed to push the boundaries of credibility beyond any reasonable limit. But Miguel was already positioning his children at different points around the tank, giving each of them specific instructions. "Carlos, you stand by the front left track. Maria, you take the front right. Ana, you go to the back left. I'll take the back right. When I give the signal, everyone knock 3 times on the armor, exactly like I showed you." Elena found herself holding her breath as Miguel orchestrated what appeared to be the most unconventional diagnostic procedure in military history. At his signal, 4 sets of knuckles rapped against the Predator's armor in synchronized percussion. The sounds that resulted were subtle, but distinctly different. Elena couldn't identify exactly what she was hearing, but her trained ear detected variations in tone and resonance that suggested something was indeed different about the tank's internal structure. "Again," Miguel instructed, "but this time, listen for which section sounds different." The second round of knocking produced the same pattern of subtle variations, but now Elena could identify the source of the difference. The front left section of the tank produced a distinctly different sound than the other 3 areas, slightly hollow, as if there was an air pocket or empty space where solid material should be. Miguel emerged from his listening position with an expression that Elena recognized from her years of working with senior NCOs, the satisfied look of someone who had just solved a problem that had been hiding in plain sight. "General," Miguel said, "I think your tank has what we call in the automotive business a deadweight shift. Something heavy has moved from where it's supposed to be, and that's throwing off the whole system." Dr. Patterson looked genuinely confused. "But our diagnostic systems would detect any significant weight displacement. The Predator's computer constantly monitors load distribution and makes automatic adjustments." "Doctor, what if the computer is making adjustments for a problem that shouldn't exist? What if it's working so hard to compensate for improper weight distribution that it can't perform its normal functions?" Elena felt something click in her mind, a moment of clarity that cut through 36 hours of frustration and confusion. "You're saying the tank's computer is so busy trying to fix a mechanical problem that it can't start the engine?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. It's like trying to start a car while the automatic transmission is stuck between gears. The computer knows something's wrong, but it can't figure out what, so it just shuts everything down to prevent damage. Chief Chen was already consulting his technical manuals, his expression shifting from skepticism to dawning understanding. The Predator's AI system does have multiple safety protocols designed to prevent operation under potentially dangerous conditions. If the computer detected significant weight distribution problems, it would indeed lock down all systems until the issue was resolved. Miguel nodded. So the question becomes, what's heavy enough to throw off a 70-ton tank, and where did it go? Elena's mind was racing through possibilities, thinking about the Predator's complex internal systems, its ammunition storage, its fuel distribution, any component massive enough to affect the tank's overall balance if it shifted position. Dr. Foster suddenly straightened from her position near the tank's rear section. "The auxiliary fuel reservoir," she said, her voice carrying the excitement of revelation. "If the auxiliary fuel reservoir somehow shifted forward in its mounting system, it could create exactly the kind of weight distribution problem you're describing." Miguel smiled, the first genuine smile Elena had seen since arriving at his garage. "Now we're getting somewhere. How do we check if this fuel reservoir is where it's supposed to be?" "There's an access panel," Dr. Patterson said, already moving toward the tank's interior. "We can visually inspect the mounting system without affecting any classified components." Elena watched as her team of experts, reinvigorated by Miguel's fresh perspective, began implementing a solution based on simple mechanical principles rather than complex electronic diagnostics. For the first time in 36 hours, she felt something that might have been hope. "Mr. Santos," Elena said as the engineers prepared to open the access panel, "if you're right about this, you may have just saved more than my career." Miguel's weathered face creased into a broader smile. "General, sometimes the biggest problems have the smallest solutions. You just have to be willing to listen to what the machine is trying to tell you." The auxiliary fuel reservoir had indeed shifted 18 inches forward from its proper mounting position, held in place by a single bolt that had worked loose during weeks of intensive testing. It took Dr. Patterson's team exactly 47 minutes to reposition the reservoir and secure it properly. When Chief Chen initiated the startup sequence at 2,247 hours, the Predator's massive engine roared to life with a sound that Elena felt in her bones, a deep, powerful rumble that announced the resurrection of America's most advanced war machine. But as Elena stood in the Nevada desert watching her engineers celebrate and listening to the Predator's systems cycle through their startup diagnostics, she found herself thinking not about the technical triumph, but about the man who had made it possible. Miguel Santos was sitting on an equipment crate, quietly watching his children explore the now-functioning tank under careful supervision, his expression thoughtful rather than triumphant. Elena approached Miguel as her staff began the process of notifying Pentagon officials that Operation Ironclad was back on schedule. The relief in those conversations was palpable. Careers saved, contracts preserved, international relationships maintained. But Elena found herself more interested in understanding how a small-town mechanic had succeeded where 42 expert engineers had failed. "Mr. Santos," Elena said, settling onto another equipment crate beside Miguel, "I need to ask you something. How did you know to look for a weight distribution problem when none of our sophisticated diagnostics detected it?" Miguel was quiet for a moment, watching Carlos explaining tank operations to his younger sisters, with the enthusiasm of someone who had just witnessed something extraordinary. "General, can I tell you about my wife?" The question surprised Elena, who had expected a technical explanation rather than a personal story. But something in Miguel's tone suggested that his answer would be more important than she realized. "Isabella died 3 years ago, cancer." Miguel's voice carried the careful control of someone who had learned to discuss devastating loss without falling apart. "For 18 months we went to the best doctors, the finest hospitals, specialists with degrees from famous universities. They ran every test, used the most advanced equipment, analyzed everything with computers that cost more than my garage." Elena listened, sensing that Miguel's story was leading somewhere significant, but uncertain how it connected to the Predator's repair. All those experts, all that technology, and nobody could figure out why Isabella kept getting sicker instead of better. The chemotherapy should have worked. The radiation should have worked. Every test said the treatment was progressing exactly as it should. Miguel paused, his eyes following Anna as she carefully examined the tank's treads under Dr. Foster's patient supervision. Finally, we met a doctor who wasn't looking at test results or computer printouts. Dr. Maria Gonzalez. She spent 2 hours just talking to Isabella, asking about things that weren't in any medical chart. How was she sleeping? What was she eating? How was she feeling emotionally? Elena began to see where Miguel's story was heading, but she let him continue in his own time. Turns out Isabella had been taking herbal supplements that her mother sent from Mexico, traditional remedies that had been in her family for generations. Isabella didn't mention them to the oncologists because they weren't real medicine, just herbs her grandmother had always used, but those herbs were interfering with the chemotherapy, making it ineffective. Miguel's weathered hands gestured toward the now functioning predator. All those brilliant doctors were treating the cancer perfectly, but they never thought to ask about Grandma's home remedies. Sometimes the most sophisticated approach misses the simplest answer. Elena felt something fundamental shifting in her understanding, not just of the tank problem, but of leadership itself. You're saying that expertise can become a limitation? Not exactly, Miguel said thoughtfully. Expertise is valuable. Your engineers know things about that tank that I could never understand. But sometimes expertise makes you focus so hard on complex possibilities that you stop seeing simple ones. Elena watched her team continuing their post-repair diagnostics, running the same sophisticated tests that had failed to identify the loose bolt that caused the entire crisis. How do you maintain that broader perspective? Miguel smiled, and Elena caught a glimpse of the man he must have been before grief and responsibility aged him beyond his years. My kids teach me every day. Carlos sees everything as an adventure. Maria notices details that adults miss because she's not filtering information through preconceptions. Anna asks questions that nobody else thinks to ask. Is that why you brought them tonight? Partly, but also because they needed to see that their old man's work matters. That fixing things, really fixing things, isn't just about having the right tools or the right training. It's about paying attention, asking different questions, and being willing to admit when you don't know something. Elena thought about her own career, built on the foundation of military expertise, advanced training, and systematic problem-solving. Those approaches had served her well for 23 years, but tonight they had nearly failed her completely. Mr. Santos, what did you see in that tank that my engineers missed? I didn't see anything they didn't see, Miguel replied, but I was looking for different things. Your people were trying to understand how the tank works. I was trying to understand why it didn't work. Sometimes those require completely different approaches. Elena's secure phone buzzed with a text from General Thompson. Congratulations on getting Predator operational. Well done. The message represented professional vindication, career preservation, and mission success. But sitting beside Miguel in the desert night, Elena realized that the most important lesson had nothing to do with tank repair. Miguel, Elena said, using his first name for the first time, you've taught me something tonight that they don't cover in any military leadership course. What's that? That strength sometimes means admitting weakness. That leadership sometimes means following someone else's lead. That the highest rank doesn't always see the clearest picture. Miguel nodded, his attention drifting back to his children, who were now engaged in animated conversation with Dr. Patterson about the physics of tank armor. General, you did something tonight that took more courage than fixing any machine. You admitted you needed help, and you asked for it from someone who had no business knowing the answer. Elena felt the weight of that observation. In 23 years of military service, she had never asked for help from outside her chain of command, never admitted that military expertise might be insufficient, never trusted classified equipment to civilian judgment. Tonight, desperation had forced her to violate every principle of military self-reliance. But here's what I learned from you, Miguel continued. Leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about finding the right people who might have the answers you need. You could have stayed on base, followed protocol, and let that tank stay broken, rather than risk your career on a crazy idea. Instead, you did what was necessary to complete your mission. Elena watched Carlos Santos examining the Predator's main gun turret with obvious fascination, already talking about military service and the possibility of working on machines like this one. She thought about her own father, Colonel Miguel Rodriguez, and the lessons he had tried to teach her about leadership that went beyond military doctrine. Miguel, what do I owe you for tonight? Miguel's answer surprised her. Nothing, General, but if you really want to repay me, remember this feeling. Remember that the best solutions sometimes come from the most unexpected places. And maybe When you're training the next generation of leaders, teach them that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. As Elena looked around at the scene before her, sophisticated military engineers working alongside a civilian mechanic and his children, a multi-million-dollar tank repaired with basic mechanical principles, her own carefully constructed professional identity fundamentally changed by a single evening in the desert, she realized that Miguel Santos had given her something far more valuable than a functioning tank. He had given her a new understanding of what leadership actually meant. Operation Ironclad exceeded every expectation. At 1,400 hours the following day, defense ministers from 12 allied nations watched in awe as the Predator demonstrated capabilities that redefined their understanding of modern armored warfare. The tank's electromagnetic railgun punched through targets at distances previously thought impossible. Its AI-assisted systems engaged multiple threats simultaneously while navigating complex terrain. The fusion reactor powered operations that would have drained conventional tanks within hours. But as Elena stood on the reviewing platform, watching international dignitaries sign preliminary agreements worth $47 billion, her mind kept drifting to a small garage in Copper Springs and the family that had changed her life in ways that had nothing to do with military technology. Secretary of Defense Harrison approached Elena during the reception that followed the demonstration, his expression carrying the satisfaction of someone whose biggest concern had been resolved. General Rodriguez, outstanding work. The President specifically asked me to convey his congratulations on turning around what could have been a catastrophic failure. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, Elena replied, accepting praise that felt simultaneously earned and undeserved. She had saved Operation Ironclad, but not through superior military leadership or advanced technical knowledge. She had succeeded by abandoning everything she thought she knew about solving problems. Elena, there's something I want to discuss with you, Harrison continued, lowering his voice to ensure privacy. The Joint Chiefs have been watching your performance here. We're considering you for promotion to Lieutenant General and assignment to the Pentagon as Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations. It would mean overseeing military technology development for all service branches. The offer represented everything Elena had worked toward throughout her career: higher rank, greater responsibility, influence over defense policy at the highest levels. It was recognition that her leadership had been noticed and valued by the most senior officials in the military hierarchy. Mr. Secretary, I'm honored by the consideration, Elena said carefully. Could I have some time to think about it? Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly. In his experience, ambitious officers didn't request time to consider promotions to the Pentagon. Of course, General. Take whatever time you need. As the reception continued around her, Elena found herself thinking about conversations she needed to have and decisions that would affect more than just her military career. The promotion to Lieutenant General would mean leaving Fort Thunderridge, abandoning hands-on command for strategic planning, trading direct leadership for policy development. 6 months earlier, Elena would have accepted the promotion immediately. Tonight, she wasn't sure what she wanted. 3 days after Operation Ironclad, Elena drove alone back to Copper Springs. She found Miguel Santos in his garage, working beneath the hood of the same delivery truck he had been repairing during her first visit. The contrast between this peaceful scene and the high-stakes drama of the previous week seemed almost surreal. General, Miguel said, emerging from under the hood with a smile that carried genuine warmth, I saw the news reports about your demonstration. Looked like everything went perfectly. It did, thanks to you, Elena replied. Miguel, I came to tell you that Operation Ironclad resulted in international contracts worth $47 billion. Those contracts will support jobs for thousands of American workers for the next decade. Mr. Secretary, 3 weeks ago, an unconventional approach saved Operation Ironclad and $47 billion in defense contracts. Sometimes unconventional approaches produce extraordinary results. Harrison was quiet for a long moment. General, you could have one of the most influential positions in the military. Why are you choosing to stay at a training base in Nevada? Elena looked out her office window toward the training grounds where the next generation of tank commanders were learning to operate the world's most advanced armored vehicles. Because influence isn't about how high you climb, sir. It's about how many people you help see things differently. 6 months later, the first class of the Civilian Military Leadership Exchange Program graduated from Fort Thunderridge. 37 officers had spent time working alongside mechanics, farmers, small business owners, and tradespeople, learning to approach problems from perspectives that military training had never provided. The graduation ceremony took place in the same desert location where the Predator had been repaired. Elena watched as military officers presented projects they had completed working alongside their civilian mentors, innovations in logistics, improvements in equipment maintenance, creative solutions to training challenges that had existed for years. Miguel Santos spoke at the graduation ceremony, his 3 children seated in the front row with expressions of pride that Elena had never seen directed toward a military event. His speech was simple and direct, focusing on the importance of listening, asking different questions, and being willing to admit when expertise wasn't enough. As Elena presented certificates to the graduating officers, she realized that her understanding of leadership had been fundamentally transformed. Rank and position remained important, but they were tools for service rather than symbols of personal achievement. True leadership meant creating opportunities for others to contribute their unique perspectives, even when those perspectives came from unexpected sources. The program Miguel had inspired would eventually be adopted by military installations across the country, creating partnerships between military bases and civilian communities that strengthened both. But for Elena, the most important outcome was personal. She had learned that the highest form of leadership was teaching others to lead differently. Standing in the Nevada desert where her transformation had begun, Elena understood that some problems require solutions that can't be found in textbooks, training manuals, or advanced technology. Sometimes the most important answers come from the wisdom of ordinary people who see extraordinary possibilities in simple solutions. The lesson Miguel Santos had taught her would guide Elena's leadership for the rest of her career. True strength comes not from having all the answers, but from having the humility to ask the right questions of the right people, even when those people are the ones you least expect to have the answers you need. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.